9. Fuck, cursed Wang Baozi, captain of Colonel Lin Yaoguang's 3rd Company, as he emptied his last round of ammunition into the advance enemy. There were simply too many of them, and they came in too fast, much like the hordes of locusts Wang had failed to repel in his home village in Henan just about every summer as far back as he could remember. Back then, Baozi and his folks could hear the locusts coming as they stood at the edge of their fields. The air shuddered with mournful drum and a dreadful, ominous urgency. Unconcerned, Baozi turned to pee one more time. But before the first drop hits the dry, powdery earth, the locusts are already here, thunders clouding out the sky, turning the world into a rasping blur of dirty yellow, and diving headlong into the thick patches of beautiful brown wheat awaiting the harvest. Those bugs, completely oblivious to Baozi and everyone else, beating and crashing on drums, gongs, pots, and pans. In only a few moments, the dirty yellow cloud rises into the air again and is gone, leaving behind only bare stalks and a young Baozi staring at the ground, agape and stupefied. "Gouzi, time to go!" Captain Wang shouted to the soldier in a torn uniform kneeling next to him. Gouzi seemed frozen there, propped against a piece of broken limestone. His right index finger rested on the trigger of his rifle. Wang saw something wet, dark, and shining on his left temple, matted by a lock of thick black hair. Wang grabbed Gouzi's arm and tried to pull him up, but it was dead weight. And when Wang released his grip, the soldier fell over with a dull thud. That was when Captain Wang began to run. It was roughly 6 miles from China Gate at the southern tip of the city to Waterfront Gate at the north. For Wang, it was a trip through hell, through fallen walls, abandoned weapons, uniforms, and bodies. Mortally wounded soldiers in the throes of death, fleeing soldiers shedding their uniforms and ransacking abandoned homes for plainclothes. As he neared the waterfront gate, Wang spotted another officer limping alongside. "Where were you positioned?" Wang asked. "Heavenly Peace Gate," came the breathless reply in a heavy Shandong accent. "Didn't you hear General Tang's retreat order?" "Shit, when was that?" "The retreat was supposed to happen between 9 and 10, but some units got wind of it early, and others, like us, never heard from anybody and just kept on fighting." By the time he reached Waterfront Gate, Captain Wang saw the remnants of the sandbagged barricades, piles of abandoned artillery, machine guns, rifles, overturned trucks, buses, cars, horse-drawn wagons, and charred bodies of both soldiers and civilians. The gate was the last way out, but all that lay outside was the Yangtze River. The miserable procession of humanity pouring through the gate encountered only the muddy banks of despair along the Yangtze River. Abandoned tanks half-driven into the water, trucks, weapons, bags, trunks, bedding, and the detritus of human existence lay scattered along the riverbank as capsized boats, doors, timber, and dead bodies whirled along toward the sea. Now enveloped in the cold of a dark morning of a new day, Captain Wang and thousands of others were still stranded at the riverbank. There was nowhere to go. They were huddling together, shivering and waiting. He heard it. The sound invoked memories of the droning locusts descending on the fields of ripened wheat back in Henan. He could feel the earth roll and rumble. A minute later, he saw the first tank, followed by a second, and then a third, tumbling toward them. Swarms of Japanese soldiers followed. Machine guns were set up on the embankment. Before long, a tight circle of Japanese soldiers with machine guns, bayonet rifles, and lean, wolf-like dogs had closed in around them. They had been taken prisoners. Unarmed, they were like thousands of stalks of wheat that had already been stripped bare. They could all be mowed down so easily now. Would it have been better to stay and die at China Gate, fighting to the end? But Wang's desire for self-preservation was too strong. He even pictured himself as a coward running away from his position, limping through the miles of death and destruction strewn all around him. For what? So he could live a few hours longer? Wang hung his head, gasped for breath. Across a veritable sea of heads, Wang noticed a Japanese commander on horseback barking commands to his subordinates. Wang was too far away to see the commander's face clearly, but could tell that he had a long beard. And the interpreter, who seemed to be Chinese, called out in a loud, squeaky voice, "Surrender! If you surrender, we won't kill you!" Following the example of everybody around him, Wang turned his torn cap backward. There was no use doing anything rational. "You have all been liberated," came the voice of the interpreter. "And to show you the kindness, the glory of the Emperor of Japan, we're going to release you. You can go straight home and be peasants again." The prisoners were told to make feeble little white flags out of whatever cloth they could find and form a column of 5 or 6 deep, march north along the riverfront. "I guess I won't die today after all," one thought as the head of the long column at last began to move. A wave of both shame and relief hit him. By the time the people immediately around him turned to merge into the column, one could see a long, blurry line of prisoners zigzagging ahead between the water on the left and the embankment on the right. The figures were silhouetted against the pinkish northeasterly sky, a subdued dragon moving ahead in deep, mute humiliation. The Yangtze River was just a few meters away from him. He could feel the great river's deep breathing, its troubled, foamy waves splashing an icy mist on his numb face. Where would he go after all this was over? Looking for Colonel Ling and his former units? Where would they be now? How many of the troops had actually survived? What about returning to his home in Henan to take care of his old folks and to plow the few acres of wheat fields again? Perhaps he should get married, have a bunch of kids, and live a quiet, ordinary life. That would make his folks brim with happiness. The prospect of leaving the world without having seen their grandkids had worried them for so long. Yeah, he should have married Cui. That was the girl he would have loved to marry and would have begged his folks to ask a matchmaker to go and make the arrangements. But he had joined the Northern Expedition Army to fight the warlords. He didn't want to marry her one night and leave her the next morning. What if he got killed on the battlefield? If Cui was still alive today, she would be the mother of several kids by now. A quiet, ordinary life. That would be nice. But what if the Japs followed him to his home in the hinterland province? Wasn't it their ambition to take over the whole of China? Where else could he go then? He would have to take up a gun again. What other choice would he have? No one could live a quiet, ordinary life now. One suddenly saw shapes moving behind the embankment. Others must have noticed too. His body tensed. The dragon-like column began to agitate. The prisoners looked at each other and then all around, necks stretched and craning in every direction. Without warning, the ear-splitting staccato of machine gun fire erupted upon them. They crouched and then tried to scatter and run, but with the embankment on their right and the river on their left, there was nowhere to go. They ran in circles. The bullets rained down on them in an unabated fury like locusts devouring a crop field. Dirt and sand were kicked into the air. Mad, desperate screams as bodies crumbled. Flashes of blood and torn flesh exploded into the air amid the chaos. One broke into a run, but he had not gotten more than a few steps when something hot and piercing tore into his side. He felt he could keep going, but suddenly he fell to the ground. Fuck, fuck, he cursed and dropped to his knees. People stumbled, falling on top of him. He was knocked over now, his legs crushed by bodies piling all around. He lay on his back, immobile. The machine guns had stopped. He tried in vain to free himself, but he had no strength. He could hear the desperate cries and the agonizing groans of those others around him who still lived. Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! A single rifle shot rang out, then another, and another. He tried to turn his head. The air was eerily quiet. The Japanese soldiers had descended into the carnage. One could see that their bayonets were dripping red as they stabbed, slashed, and hacked at anything that still moved. A Chinese soldier who lay nearby was set upon and cut open with bayonets and eviscerated, his innards flung into the air. One tried to close his eyes, but he had lingered on the horrible sight too long. Now it was too late. A dirty figure in a yellow uniform ambled toward him. What is this? Some foot soldier? One thought. Well, I'm a captain, goddammit. In an instant, he saw a brief flash of a blood-covered bayonet and felt his chest pierced as if with a long, bone-chilling icicle. His lungs collapsed and he struggled for air. He felt the blood lapping somewhere against the back of his throat. He tried to take one last breath, but there was only a gurgling sound. After that, there was only darkness.